Hey guys, welcome back, and today we are talking about some major casting news, and that is that Barth Feldman has been cast as Oliver in Maybe Happy Ending, and if you've been on social media the past 24 hours, you know how much controversy this has garnered. Now again, I think that this is a very complex and nuanced situation, and I'm going to bring my take. My hope when you watch this video is that you can take in my opinion and judge it off your own opinion, and let two different differing opinions exist. That is okay. Now make sure to like, sub, comment, and follow me on Instagram. Let's get into the video. So the topic is pretty simple. Barth Feldman is coming in for a limited 9-week engagement to replace Darren Criss, who I think is going to come back after that. He is the boyfriend of Helen J. Shen, who is the lead in Maybe Happy Ending, the female lead. And this has caused a lot of controversy because people expected Oliver to be played by an Asian part, because in the publicity, in the lead-up, they marketed this as an all-Asian cast, about taking pride in that and being excited for future performances where that could be a thing. And I've come to this distinction. You know, when I first saw the news, my first reaction initially was, ooh, I don't know about that. But then I realized, hey, this actually makes sense, because Oliver and Claire are not humans, they are robots. Meaning any race or any gender can play these two parts. That's a fact. It's not an Asian part, it's not a white part, it's just a part. However, I think the big failure that the show didn't take into consideration is the fact that in all of the major productions, it's been an Asian cast, and there's clearly an initiative and a goal to strive for that kind of casting. And so clearly there was an expectation that you had the audience fulfilled in. Now they released a statement basically saying any race can play any of the parts, well, except Oliver and Claire. And that is true, but I think if they had done that prior to it starting on Broadway, I don't think this controversy would have gotten as heated as it has. It still would have been a controversy, but not in that same level of controversy as it is right now. Now, I do want to say that I think it is very valid to feel upset, to feel angry, to feel betrayed by this casting, because it is definitely not good optics. You have a traditionally Asian part, which is there's not a lot of Asian lead parts, you know, on Broadway right now, or in general. And if it is, it's Miss Saigon, right? And, you know, I was expecting them, especially in today's culture, to go and have at least the next couple of Olivers and Claires be Asian actors or people of color, not a white male. And it's really bad optics for you to have the boyfriend of the lead, which will lead to nepotism accusations and it not being fair, and he only got the part because he's with the girl, and the fact that he's a white male taking over an Asian part. It's bad optics all around, and it has a very bad look, and it can lead to very emotional responses. And so I do think that at the end of the day, you know, this clearly is a part that means a lot to the Asian community, and I think they should have cast a Asian actor before casting a white actor, and I think that would have just been better optics. I think the producers failed to take into account that in today's society, this kind of casting is going to cause backlash, especially if you look at the cultural context and the political context. Diversity is under immense attack right now, and if this was a Kamala Harris America, maybe it would have been received differently. Still controversy, but probably not the level it is now. And the fact that, you know, how this looks, you know, many people were saying you won the awards and now you can go back to the white man. And listen, they're gonna have many more Asian Olivers and Claires, and probably at some point a black Claire and Oliver, and a transgender Oliver and Claire, and that's completely fine. But I do think that, you know, when you are, you know, you have to, I think that the producers, and Darren Criss is one of the producers, so there is an Asian lead producer on the show, that's Darren Criss, should have been more aware of how sensitive people are to diversity in today's times. Even if Andrew was an amazing fit, you know, I do think that taking priority towards Asian actors, even if they're not your first choice, but they're like your second choice, maybe you just go with that choice. And I wouldn't call that reverse racism or discrimination, because you can't really do that with people of color. And also, I think that, you know, if you take into account the historical context of there is such a disparaging amount of lead parts that are not stereotypical or based in trauma for Black and Asian and all kinds of people. And what this means, even though it's not a race-specific part, I think if they had taken that into consideration, I think they would have made a different choice. And I think they should have made a different choice from a business perspective, because I don't think this is good PR for the show. And, you know, producers are just very dumb, I think, sometimes. And I think that they were very dumb in this choice. Now, will this affect the box office? No. These controversies do not affect the box office. It's not going to do worse. It's not going to do better. You know, even if Andrew wasn't in the part, because people are like, oh, Andrew's stunt casting, and yes, big magazines picked it up, so he is a name, but he's pretty much less of a star than Darren Criss is. And to an extent, you could say Darren Criss, how much of a stunt casting is he, considering that the box office failed when he was in previews, when it was in previews with him. So Andrew is definitely not being brought in to buy tickets because he's not a name. He's not a person that you can count on to sell tickets. If Andrew Barth Feldman was in an original musical, it would just be like having an unknown. He really is not going to sell tickets, and ticket prices will go down even if when he is in it, and even if he wasn't in it, it's still going to do really well because it won Best Musical and has a huge fan base. And it's not going to do as well with Darren in it. Maybe it'll do 1.1, you know, 1,096,000, maybe a couple 900s. Which is perfectly serviceable and good for this show, considering where it started. And considering with how much money it's making in the summer, it can take those hits. So yeah, I think people saying, oh, this is, you know, stunt casting. It's not stunt casting. This is not stunt casting. This is, because, if I'm being honest, Andrew's gonna kill it in this part. He's perfect for Oliver. I think Ian Armitage from Young Sheldon should play Oliver. I even said that in my review of the show. So, objectively, he's a talented actor who's going to be good for the part, and that's why they cast him. They cast based on merit and who was best fit for the part. And ultimately, I think that is where casting should go. You shouldn't be focusing on diversity or all that. You should be focusing on diversity, but you shouldn't make that the deciding factor. There's an interesting story that someone told me about a casting director that cast a whole group and said, oh, it's too white, we need to have more diversity, or, you know, these leads need to be black, we need one black lead, one white lead, and that is very offensive, because it's seeing non-white people as objects. It's a form of a minstrel show. It's a form of trying to be coming from a good place, but ultimately not seeing us as people, but seeing us as check boxes and diversity quotas that you need to fulfill. And it makes you wonder, if you are a person of color, did I get this part because I was the first choice, or because I was of my skin color? And that's a whole other can of worms that we could unravel. But that is just my perspective on casting. And I do think that casting should be based on who is best fit for the part, unless it's a strange looper in the Heights where it kind of needs to be a specific, where the character is so race specific to their journey that having someone not be black or Latino would just be weird, you know? So if Oliver and Claire were a Usher or a Uznavi, I would be with you guys. I would be totally against this. But when you look at Oliver and Claire, they aren't race-specific parts, and there's nothing in the characters or whatever that makes them tied so specifically to a specific race. Because they don't speak Korean, for example. They don't, like, you know, the world around them is the culture, right? And it's influenced in many ways. And if you've seen the show, I've seen it live 3 times. I know the show very well. So I know that it isn't, it helps, right? It makes it make sense, I guess, a little bit. But ultimately, this is not an Usher or Uznavi, and if it isn't that specific kind of a part, you can and have the right to cast whomever you want in these parts. And it ends there. It's as simple as that. However, I do understand where people are coming from, and I do think that that should have been given some more thought, especially in its infancy. You know, Little Shop is a good example of the plan is traditionally voiced by a black actor. Even though the plan is not a specific race, you could cast whoever you want, and I think if you did that now, there probably wouldn't be a lot of controversy. But if it, you know, the show was new and it came out in 2025, and you had a black person playing the plant, and then you had a white actor playing it, there would be a controversy. And so I do think having this happen later on in the run mitigates it and softens it, and kind of weakens it, and I think that is better for people and for the show and for actors, because clearly they're going to feel the controversy and the backlash, and the show is as well. And so I do think that, early on, I think, you want to keep that tradition going. And I'm sure there was at least one Asian actor that they probably thought was really good but wasn't perfect for the part. So again, I do think we have to make that distinction between race-specific parts and ambiguous parts that happen to be played traditionally by people of color. I think the difference between why, people that are fans of musicals aren't upset when a white traditional character is played by a black traditional character is because non-white actors have been not given the main leads, and so, there's not really an issue. White people are still going to get probably more jobs than people of color, and, they can take it. And I agree with that to an extent. I don't think that you should hate on Andrew Barth Feldman or think that this is the end. I see people saying we're going to boycott the show and, really crazy stuff like that. The show's still going to have an all-Asian cast with the exception of Andrew. It still has a creative team that is Asian, and there's still going to be many Olivers on tour, in London, 100% on Broadway, that are going to be Asian, that might be black, that are probably going to be white again. So this isn't the end of the journey. I think people are focusing too much on the smaller picture versus the bigger picture. And I know for a fact that y'all would be way more upset if they just got an Asian Oliver now versus in the original where, Darren Criss made history, and so there was a lot of wins, and still a lot of wins in this show being on Broadway. And you shouldn't boycott it, because it's doing the opposite of helping BIPOC shows. And so so I hope you understand where I'm coming from on this whole thing. I think, it's a pretty fair assessment. I get that people are upset, but again, I think the discourse is just a lot of noise that doesn't lead to any productiveness, that doesn't lead to any real conversation or understanding. It's people saying, I am right, you are wrong, and if you're a white person and your opinion is invalid, which is so stupid. And so many people on the comments were white people telling everyone how wrong this was, how racist this was. I mean, there was a comment that literally said, I'm not Asian, but your opinion is invalid because you're not Asian. What world are we living in? It truly is parody, and absurd, and offensive. Even though they're coming from a well-intentioned place. There were way more white people upset than there were Asian people, in the comments. And so I think, the discourse is so black and white and so wrong or right, you're racist or you're not racist, and it just is so unproductive. I think the conversation we need to be having on diversity is, one, and use an example, Snape, he's black in Harry Potter. I don't like that, but that's because the character of Snape is a very stereotypical black part, and it makes, and then there's also the fact that he is bullied, that he's got the least bit of power, and you really have to, when it comes to diversity, really clue in to who's being cast in what parts. You're not going to see Harry or Dumbledore as black, or the leads, or the one with the most wizard power, or the most social power, played by non-white people, because it allows the diversity demos and hunger to be satisfied, while not actually giving them the full power, keeping non-white people in their place in society. And that's an issue. And that's why I'm not a huge fan of Snape casting, not because I don't think that Snape can be played by a black actor, but because I know that the corporate media of Warner Brothers is not going to make it a black-centric story. Because if you have a non-white actor playing a traditional white part, and you don't change the context of it, it's just a blackface playing a white part. It's whiteface. Instead of creating an authentic black experience and story that will change the story, but that's actually doing the work, and that's allowing the race to matter. Because we can't live in a world where we ignore race, or it's colorblind, right? In specific stories. So Harry Potter is an example of that. And so we need to be holding the people that do diversity more accountable. And seeing sometimes when people have criticisms of diversity, to actually listen to them than to immediately go to they're racist. The second thing that we need to be focusing on more is not doing this mentality of Oliver needs to be Asian, Snape needs to be white. It's a very dangerous mindset, and it's a perpetuating a culture where roles are defined by race, and the conservative right uses that for their racist agenda because they are racist and we are not. But when you compare the right and the left, they sound exactly the same, and they're both saying if this person that's a specific race plays this character that's been traditionally played by a person of a specific race, it's wrong, and it hurts everyone. And I think assigning roles to specific races is just a dangerous mentality. And if we do that, then it's like, well, technically Garen and Helen are not Korean, so technically they're not real diversity. You know what I mean? We could go down this rabbit hole again and again and again and again until we have nothing. And or saying Darren's too white passing, you know, like, I'm surprised people haven't criticized that, or that the fact that it's a white director, you know what I mean, thankfully, but that hasn't happened yet. But at the end of the day, I think that defining roles by race is wrong, because I think any role can be played by any race, but you have to be able to put in the work and make it specific, like the Snape example, or in the case of maybe Happy Ending, where it's been historically played by a minority community, to take that into account and take into account that sensitivity, especially if you're a new musical, to maybe not do that. And to not, instead of going with the white choice, go with the diverse choice that's maybe your second choice, but if the white person wasn't there, would be your first choice. Now, some people might say that's giving it to the mob, that's whatever, and if that's why you're doing it, that is really dystopian. But where I'm coming from, and why I encourage that, or I'm okay with that, is because I think if you're taking that from the perspective of the context of how the community, the minority community that you are representing the most feels, it might change how you cast the show. Still basing it off of merit, but maybe not going with the one choice, even if it is a white person, because again, there is a difference in the fact that it's easier and not as weird for a traditionally white character to be played by a non-white actor, because white people have been dominating the screen, you know. And so and when there's diverse roles, which is, and there's many, gets a white person, and even though it's not racially specific, it leaves a bad taste in people's mouths, and I think that is valid. And I think, you know, movies won't have this issue, but musicals in general will have this issue, and so I would tell producers of shows to take into account the political and cultural context of your show, because that might actually shift how you view things. Because again, I think that we should be, you know, casting people on talent alone. You know, I think if this was 3 years into maybe Happy Ending's run and people having this, I would not be saying any of this at all, because I've been like, it's been here for 3 years, but I think it happening so early on was a mistake. And I think, you know, is harder to, like, you know, if you're gonna do it so early on, you're gonna have to be ready for the backlash, but then also for the fact that maybe, you know, prioritizing the minority community, even if they're not your first choice, but they're like your second choice, you know, if in that situation, maybe go with the second choice because of what it means, you know, which might be controversial, and you can make arguments against that I would actually see sense in. I think that's the conversation we can have on diversity that's actually going to lead corporations and producers to want to engage with us in conversations, for you to see my side, for me to see your side, as I am validating people who are upset with its sides, even if I'm not 100% with you, and it leading to a place where it's not just noise, because that's all you guys are doing, is noise. And, you know, that doesn't help anyone. And yeah, I just think the discourse is honestly what I'm more annoyed with and more upset about than the casting, because I feel like this was almost some kind of experiment and we failed it miserably. And I understand why people go to the conservative right, why they don't want to engage with us liberals or progressives, because we are of the mindset of you are with us or you're against us. If you are white, your opinion is invalid. And a lot of the times, people aren't even saying this opinion is fact, is gospel. They're just sharing their opinion. And you guys have to be willing to let people have their opinions and disagree with them and let them exist. Or have the two ideas exist of, we should have all of our cast with talent, but also we kind of have an icky, left a sour taste within our mouth, and, you know, the optics don't look good, and both ideas can exist at the same time, and we can be okay with that. We can be okay with two things being true at the same time, or two things being not true at the same time, you know, and that I think the controversy is overblown, and I think that it's a good thing that Andrew's cast, because he is very talented in it. It's not like they're casting a Nick Jonas, you know? But at the same time, I get people's upset, I get the sour taste, and I understand it, and I think the cultural context should have changed their minds, you know? But the reality is what the reality is, and we need to support Maybe Happy Ending rather than go against it. And for all of the white people that are, I'm going to just do screenshots of all of the comments. You can read them, and I'll let them speak for themselves. But it truly is horrifying to see how people react and think in this mob mentality way in 2025. So yeah, that's my opinion on Maybe Happy Ending and the whole controversy of Andrew Barth Feldman. And it's not a good look that he's dating the lead actress. You know, it's just not good optics at all. Terrible timing. Terrible timing. And people who are saying, oh, is this going to get Great Commented? Great Comment did not close because of the controversy. It closed because Mandy pulled out. If he didn't pull out, ticket sales would have gone up. It probably wouldn't have been open for much longer after that because they needed a star because it was such an expensive production to put on. But Oak being replaced is not why the show closed. This is a lot of online controversy that doesn't actually go into real world consequences. I mean, the West Side Story thing where there was an actor that was accused of assault, which was really bad. People still went and saw it. So, yeah. That's the video. Like, sub, and comment, and go and see Maybe Happy Ending, and go and support Andrew Barth Feldman, and calm down.